a joint presentation between the Kansas City ASIS chapter and the Kansas City InfraGard session. I am the chair of the ASIS chapter, Rick Dunn, and also we have the president of the InfraGard chapter on, and we'll be sharing our duties, Donna Gomez.
Hello.
And this is the Greater Kansas City Security Response to COVID-19. This is going to be, we got some members, a panel full of experts, SMEs in their field that will be discussing a little bit portions of COVID and how it affects us. And during the discussions, what I see is our guest panel will give a little presentation, and at the end of their presentation, we'll have a quick Q&A and then move on to the next presenter. And then at the very end, we'll have a full Q&A. Again, this is the purpose why we're holding this meeting, is basically trying to share different ideas and give some insight as we're dealing with the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and we'll use the format of the panel. This is our agenda. Before I turn it over to Trina, I would like to have Donna give any updates, her presentation from her role, professional role, and as the president of InfraGard.
Okay, thanks. This is Donna Gomez, president of the Kansas City InfraGard chapter, and just wanted to, one, apologize to anyone with the short notice for getting this out. I had the dates wrong, wires crossed, working from home. I seem to be working a little bit harder than I normally would, I guess. That's the way it feels, where my organization skills feel a little bit tested to the edge. So I apologize again for the late notice and having the dates crossed, so that way we can, we hope to have a recording out to everyone, so in case someone missed it, then they can, access it later. As far as our meetings, the in-persons, we've had to cancel all those, which is pretty common. We'll be going across that. But if there's anything that comes up as far as what you're needing from the InfraGard chapter, be sure to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and we can get that out to the rest of the board and try and coordinate. We will be moving to webinars, so we'll be having that, and whatever we can do to assist you through this time, we are here to help. If you have submitted a membership request, those are on hold right now, but we can advise when that process is getting started back up. But be sure to be checking your alerts and logging in as much as possible, because you don't want to lose your privileges if you haven't accessed the site within 365 days, because we do close those out. So if you have any questions, again, just connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and I can help answer anything that you need.
Trina, are you still on?
I am. Do you want me to go ahead and start?
Please.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Trina Ricketts. I am a partner at a law firm called Ogletree Deakins here in Kansas City. We have about 1,000 lawyers across the country in almost every state and in almost every city, major city. We also have offices in Canada, Germany, Mexico City, Paris, and so we're an international law firm. A lot of what we do is we advise very large and actually all sizes of employers on managing their workforce. And as we all know, right now, the pandemic has had great impacts on workers and employees across the nation. So I thought I'd talk to you a little bit today about what employers are doing and how they are looking at their workforces, so that you can analyze how that can impact you from a security standpoint. One of the critical things here in the employment space and in the employer space is that the laws are extremely dynamic. We are seeing, I will give you an example. I was going to give a webinar on the first Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and we were getting FAQs from the Department of Labor minutes before we were going to go on to thousands and thousands of people. So very dynamic. That is causing a lot of stress, as I'm sure you all know, and is causing employers to have to make very quick decisions. So those laws not only include the Families First Act and the CARES Act, but also there are, obviously state and local stay-at-home orders, and they're all over the place. They're all and across and I know we're focusing here on our metropolitan area, but from a larger systemic analysis, we have different types of orders that are in place all over the country, and our employers are trying to figure out how to comply with them. They're also at the same time trying to do whatever they can to stay afloat. In some instances, to morph their businesses in some instances, or to make really hard business decisions. And some of those business decisions that I think impact a security industry include what I have below here, which are business responses, which we see our clients are having to make decisions about some type of pay reduction. That may be an hours reduction, it may be wage reductions. And those types of things are going to have impacts on workforces. And when we know anytime there's financial stress, that can result in other types of security issues. They're also looking at furloughs. Furloughs are defined all over the place, but generally furloughs are typically a temporary leave, and there may be some benefit associated with that, or not a benefit associated with it. They're typically unpaid. Sometimes employees can keep their benefits or not keep their benefits depending on how they're structured. But from a security standpoint, knowing when employees are going to be out and in and what kind of risks those pose, I think would be important. It's extremely dynamic. And then the last one we have on here is our terminations. And those are, of course, what employers are really trying to avoid having to do. They're very distasteful, but when need be, they're having to make those terminations. And we all know that loss of employment bring out violence or other type of behaviors in those workers who are being severed. So from a big picture perspective, I think coordination, and I think some of our speakers here as we move forward, coordination with business leaders, coordinations with human resources, coordination with legal in the private sector is going to be extremely important to make sure that those who are security are understanding what is happening within that business. Now, of course, we're hopeful that this is going to be a temporary thing, it's going to rebound, and so we're hoping to see that back end where we have a new influx. We might have an outflux of workers, and we're hoping to have a new influx of workers, as the pandemic levels out. But I just and another thing for our security personnel to remember is the business leaders are very stressed as well. As you can imagine, they're having to make really tough decisions. And so there is a lot of, the stress is all the way around. It is a very, very stressful time. And then I think we're seeing people also have to layer on to the top of that a new working structure, working from home, perhaps working with children who are at home, perhaps working with people who act like children who are at home. So there's a lot of layers of stress. And so that's something that I think is, as our security within the community, just being mindful of those changes, how dynamic everything is, and coordinating with those business leaders would be what my general recommendation would be from working with private sector employers. Any questions?
Hey, this is Rick Dunn. Thank you, Trina. And I forgot to remind everyone that's online and on the phone that we are recording this. So just be aware of that. Do we have any questions for Trina?
I have a question. The CARES Act was just released. What type of information are you seeing coming across on what that looks like from a legal standpoint, as far as people filing for unemployment? Because it seems very loose on the verbiage to say, well, I have to go home and take care of a kid who might have COVID, so I need to file for unemployment and get the additional $600.
So what we're seeing, and I'm primarily advising on employers, and they're really trying to make sure that employees, when they need that additional benefit, that they can get it. We're seeing every state, all states, the unemployment piece is state specific. So Kansas and Missouri are going to be different in how they're handling those types of applications. But I'm generally seeing employers and our agencies be very generous with those benefits. Any other questions? And by the way, so my law firm, so you'll see my contact information there, but my law firm, Ogletree Deakins, has a lot, and I mean a plethora of complimentary resources on our website. We've put together a coronavirus response team that I'm a part of. One of the things that we decided to do as an organization is to provide voluminous information completely free of charge. So there's a lot of information on our website. We're regularly providing webinars on all of these laws as they change. So sorry, in the background. So we are regularly providing all types of complimentary information and resources. So feel free to hop on our website at ogletreedeakins.com and pop into our coronavirus resources, and there's all kinds of information in there.
Thanks, Trina. Thank you for the informative presentation. I'd like to just reiterate what Trina just talked about. Her law office did a presentation with our chapter last year for marijuana, and it was outstanding. And a few members of the ASIS team attended a webinar a few weeks ago at the very beginning of the coronavirus, and it has proved to be very accurate of what they were presenting at that time. So it was well worth it. I mean, the information that they put out was really well worth it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate that. And please feel free to utilize it. We made a decision as a firm to put out this information so that our community could review it in this difficult time. So thank you, Rick.
Now we have Donna.
Hey everybody, I'm back again to talk about it from the government side. So my role is security, risk, and compliance. So I'm balancing 3 hats. And during a time of crisis like what we're having here, going and initiating that pandemic planning and getting everything together, the main focus is continuity of government, because that's what the public's looking for, and it's how do we educate the public with the information that they need to know. And also the internal business discussion as far as our essential services, what we need to have available and the staff that's needed to provide those services. putting on my security hat and then having to balance that compliance part. There's different areas within the government that actually have other compliance requirements that have been set by the state or even the federal government. Some of the things have not changed. So I know if anyone has been driving around and maybe you just bought a new vehicle in January, February, and the car tags had expired. Well, we close the services for that as far as to do any of the renewals or even renew your driver's license. So if you needed to move to Real ID, because of the state stay-at-home order that impacted the county stay-at-home order as far as what services were available, and so now people have an extension of that because the offices are closed. So it's getting that communication out, making people aware, and then also making sure there's coordination with enforcement action to know that, okay, this service is not available. People are, they can't do anything about it. So don't hold to what's currently on the books. So there's exceptions. And so just making sure that communication is out. Also promoting legitimate sources. So as a member of InfraGard, I have that responsibility as well as far as making sure that people access the site and get the different communications that we have available. But also as a government employee, as a security person, my job is to ensure that reliable information, especially when it comes to scams, is getting out to our staff. And also kind of assisting the public information office, if I'm just a good steward of just being a resident and I see somebody is posting some unknown website that's saying this, that, and the other, that's kind of trying to downplay everything that's happening, and it's not legitimate data that's come from the CDC or it's come from the county's health department and everything else, is to promote that website. I promote our county website as much as possible to make sure that legitimate sources are getting out there versus personal opinions, because as a government employee, my role is also to ensure that what's out there is not causing a panic. It's giving them real data, real information, and making sure they're getting it to the professionals versus this is what someone believes is true, and then you have the downfall of that. As far as our response activities, once the stay-at-home orders went in and we started closing our public facilities, is okay, now we have people working from home and I can't control their network. But what I can control is, or trying to assist those people, is how to keep them safe when online. And so security awareness. We actually use a platform that allows users to get the information through their phone if they receive email on their phone, or if they have access, and they're connected through the VPN, they can also connect to it because it's a cloud hosted site. We've also created an extranet for our employees so that they can get to it and just log in and they can get information there. Any resources to help them in case they forget or something goes wrong as far as they forgot their password, all of these different things, trying to make it easy for them, but also maintain security at the same time. So everything around working remote, getting that communication out to them and assisting them as much as possible so that way they feel informed. And then definitely keeping everyone abreast of the COVID-19 scams. We're working with the Public Information Office on that and internal communications as well. But just as membership is on the phone here, and then, ASIS members, the same thing goes, is make sure that, it's everybody is looking at what Homeland Security has out there, what the FBI alerts are out there, and what you see on the FTC website, because the FTC website has actually been collaborating and getting all that information and posting it, and really keeping those blogs up to date with the new information and having the samples out there so people can see what's going on. There are so many different attacks occurring right now, monopolizing on COVID-19, that it's kind of hard to keep up with it and segment them out. I know I've posted a few of them and shared, but definitely I promote those links. And, as a government entity, I know there's some questions that come from people, but the thing is like, do your part to help ensure that people are using legitimate sources for information about COVID-19, not sharing their personal opinions and, the tinfoil hat conspiracy theories that are out there, because that doesn't do any good. Because when it comes to continuity of government, we want to ensure that people are trusting what's being out there, and when they're listening to our daily alerts, we're having daily board meetings, that they're getting information, and so they know what's actually happening in their area. Definitely, if you live in Johnson County, check out our website. We have a coronavirus dedicated website. You can search it. It's actually referenced a lot of times through Facebook, or even 41 News and everyone else. They send links to that when they promote those. So just, again, promote legitimate sources, not personal opinions. And that's all I got for you right now.
Thank you, Donna. Is there any questions for Donna? All right. I hear someone writing. Our next presenter is RJ Hope from, I think went too far, from Burns and McDonnell. RJ, you there?
Thanks, Rick. Can you guys hear me okay? Or someone hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, well, at least there's one. All right. So thanks, Rick. As you said, I'm RJ Hope. I'm our Corporate Director of Security at Burns and McDonnell. What I broke my presentation into is kind of a brief timeline from a Burns and Mac perspective, and then some of the things that we thought about and addressed throughout the process. Our timeline really starts January 26th, and the reason that I reference that is corporate security had been watching COVID for a number of weeks prior to this. And the reason our team kind of keyed on it is China was doing everything different, right, than it had when it came to SARS, when it came to swine flu, when it came to bird flu, all these other things. China was doing things differently. And so that really made us set up and take notice. So on January 26th, when China had just over 2,700 cases, is when we suspended all business travel to China. We reached out to our clients, all of our internal business partners, and suspended that. We also created an internal, much like many other companies, we have an intranet where we share company information with our employee owners. We created a travel campaign on travel hygiene to start make our employee owners aware. Very quickly, about a week and a half to 2 weeks after that, we suspended travel to South Korea, Japan, and Italy. And at that point, we convened our COVID response team, what became our COVID response team. And you'll see that in the next part that we got coordination between our leadership, human resources, communications, health and safety, corporate security. That is our COVID response team, is leadership from each of those sections, with one addition being our legal. We have legal in there as well. And so we convened that team to start working on what would be Burns and McDonnell's response and how we're going to manage our business going forward. What was really interesting is, and many of you can attest, this isn't necessarily a security issue as we typically think of it, right? In the security industry, we naturally practice risk avoidance. That was why we were following the virus in China, is purely from a risk avoidance perspective. So what we found is, as we kind of became the voice of COVID, we actually became the leaders of initiating the response and getting the right parties together. And what that really encompassed most early on, and it's natural, right? When you are a human resources person or you're a corporate communications person, that's where you live and that's where you want to focus that message. What we experienced is, in that early stages, we were responding to our environment instead of dictating the pace of our environment ourselves. And what really shifted that was, from corporate security, we pushed really hard to launch a Burns and Mac Intel team. Now, that sounds super sexy, and you're probably thinking there's a whole lot of prior Marine or Army or Navy Intel folks working on that. Nope, we had to build our own team. As a Marine, I'll tell you what an old staff sergeant told me is, you go to war with the Marines you have, not the Marines you want. So our Intel team is a mix of safety folks, HR folks, corporate security folks, comm folks, that basically data mine that we have taught to look for little nuggets, right? to help us build that picture with the goal of dictating the tempo, right? We wanted the tail, which is the response team, which is corporate security, to start wagging the dog and being ahead. And it took us a couple weeks to get ahead where we were putting out communication, developing documentation before the environment dictated it, that we were basically reading the environment and responding ahead of time. Go to the next slide, please. There it is. And I'll tell you what, one of the things that greatly helped when we started to, what I call wag the dog, is we started very early a COVID business call. It started really small. It started with Cerner, Black & Veatch, Aletha Med, Evergy, just to say, look, hey, everybody, no competitors here. We are all in this together. What is everybody doing? What is everybody seeing? And what this then has grown into this massive list here of companies that are taking part in our Monday morning COVID business calls. These calls are not marketing, not competitive. They are totally to understand what each firm's doing, how they're responding. We discuss HR matters such as how long are you going to pay employees that might be caring for someone who has COVID? How are you testing and reoccupying your sites? We've literally covered everything on these calls, and they've been very helpful to our leadership team at Burns & Mac from a business decision, right? You know, Black & Veatch, Burns & Mac, we are our competitors, but our two corporate security groups work and share information very closely. What this enables us to do with that intel report, our intel team, every day we produce an intel report that identifies in the past 24 hours what has changed, what is our opinion of the next 24 to 36 hours, what's our long-term opinion, and then what are some decisions the board should be considering making in the next 7 to 14 days and 14 days and plus. And these are just broad sweeping that we come in and we see from that environment. But this group has been probably the most beneficial to all of us. And I know Phil's going to come up after me. I would love to hear his opinion on this, just to hear how these different companies are responding gives you those extra fingers and feelers out there to understand and respond to. Next slide, please. Last slide, I promise. And then from a business perspective, when we were going through the considerations of what we were doing, right? You know, at first when this came up, it was corporate security, and I'll give my group just a ton of credit for what they did, is they really helped herd the cats, right? And one of the things that we have found that corporate security does really well in most cases, but other organizations or other entities within your business do not, is understand unintended consequences. And so we help those groups when they would say, okay, hey, we're going to do a questionnaire at a job site, which is what we did, right? We put in a questionnaire that's got 3 or 4 questions tied to the CDC guidelines. And then it also includes taking the person's temperature at a job site. Well, an unintended consequence of that is you have a lot of tradesmen and women. These are tough, rumble-tumble guys and gals that are used to working through not feeling good. Also, they don't get paid if they don't show up at the job site. That's the nature of their work. Or are we indirectly giving them an incentive to lie on the form? Well, our form is there to be preventive to make sure we don't introduce or reduce the likelihood of introducing COVID to our sites. Or are we incentivizing them, unfortunately, to not necessarily tell the truth? So we worked really close with our subs and our contractors on site to help where that was not a negative to those folks, that we could continue to find a way to get them paid. That's what one of the things that corporate security helped them out with. And it really kind of started with understanding the mental health of our employee owners. This is different from a lot of folks. I heard while Trina was speaking that there was some kids in the background, which is great. I can't tell you the number of Teams calls I sat on that were introduced by any number of mammal, from cat to dog to child to whatnot. That's great. But being at home all this time is a change for families. But then we also found where we had members of my team that their major social context were that of work, their local church, and family. And they were not married. They didn't have kids at home. Weren't in a relationship. So now they were devoid of human contact. And how do we keep them engaged and give them human contact so that they know they're still part of the team and part of the community. The other thing we had to start addressing is getting our expats back. And the ones that are living Oconus, most of them decided to stay. But what a lot of that is educating them on the ramifications of their decision to stay. Case in point is we have a family that decided to stay in Mumbai, India. Great, he's a good man. I admire the heck out of what he's doing, but understanding and educating him, you're making a decision that if you get COVID, you're going to be in the Indian health system, not the US. Not that they're bad people. They just don't have the infrastructure that the US. We really wanted to make them aware. Also, we went into our case tracking, which is most of us, and we talked on the call on Monday, are still doing Excel spreadsheet wise. It was Phil Lance that kind of gave us our first crack at how we were going to track, but it's a pretty big monster that from the positive to the suspected to the quarantine. And then one of the things that we didn't expect is a lot of the health agencies are, because of maybe someone's age, they're not testing them. They have all the symptoms, but they're going to preserve that test for someone that may be older or more high risk. And what we're finding is they're sending Joe to home and saying, you are deemed positive even without a test. Well, how does the business respond to that especially when it comes to space cleaning early on, when we still had offices? How do we clean? How often do we clean? What do we clean? And this has really started to shift to the last bullet point, which is back to work. What are we going to do when we start reintroducing people back into the office? If, hopefully it's midsummer, right? Folks want to get back in the office and start working. COVID-19 coronavirus is not gone. It will be reintroduced to our offices. Each and every one of us, everybody on this call will have it back in their offices in some form or fashion. So how do we manage those coming into work? How do we manage the cleaning of an office so we're not cleaning our mega campus every other week with, a very high intensity and complex sterilization process? How do we manage that while still bringing people back to work? The other side of that is on our construction sites. That's where we've seen has been our proving ground on how we're going to bring folks back to work. As I alluded to earlier, when we were talking about unintended consequences. But another piece of that, which is helping us prepare for Burns and Mac back to some form of normalcy, is a lot of times our field personnel, they get trips home every 3 weeks. That's part of their agreement and how they work. These folks want to see their families, and we understand. But conversely, we're not necessarily thrilled with them maybe going to New York City. Let's just say they're from New York City, where you've got active community spread, you've got a shelter in place. We're not necessarily happy with that. So we're working with ways that we can accommodate them while protecting them on the work site. And that's been a difficult one to work with. Same thing with just general facility access is Burns and Mac typically moves in about all of our regional offices because we work in projects in the region. We use resources in each region. So it's kind of a revolving door of employee owners going in and out. How do we manage the movement of people and personnel when there's so many different shelter in place orders, do not travel orders, stay at home orders? Case in point, Virginia it goes through June 10th and Ohio is through May 4th. How do we keep those straight? And then we have travel restrictions where if you're coming from if you're coming from Louisiana into Texas, you're going to get stopped at the border and they're going to reinforce a mandatory quarantine. How does that affect just the movement of our people outside of business? Let's just say they're going to go see grandma two hours away from Louisiana to Texas, or Texas to Louisiana, or whatever those cases. How do we help manage that? And our solution has been education, and falling back on the forms that we have at our field offices and the pre-screening for folks coming back in. And then that last piece I've kind of touched on, the back to work side. We're working on that now. That was a topic of our Monday call with our businesses, and everyone kind of like, well, I don't know what it's going to look like, but we know it's not going to be April 24th, firecrackers go off and everybody runs back to work. We're going to have some caveat and determine how do we reoccupy the building with social distancing, with mask of some form. we're also wondering how this will change the workforce. As you hear the workforce of the future, right? Well, that might be tomorrow for Burns and Mac. How do we accommodate that? How do we accommodate those that are in a high risk class or caring for folks that are sick or in a high risk class? We want to make sure that we accommodate them as best we can and still, accomplish our missions, which is keep our clients successful. So that's Burns and Mac in a nutshell, how we've approached that. I'll throw it out now if there's any questions anybody might have. No questions, we'll make this assumption that that was like manna from heaven.
Thanks, RJ. I've been on the Monday morning call the last few weeks, and I could tell you it's been wealth of information being presented, and it was part of the impetus of having this webinar, is trying to share with even a greater group of people and some of the insights that you're bringing forward. And it was a pretty good snapshot of a lot of the discussions that we've had the last few weeks. Are there any questions for RJ before we move on? I hear a mic, open mic. Is there someone want to ask a question? All right, I'm moving on. Our next speaker is Dan Arnold, but he got pulled into a COVID meeting. So we have Sean Burns with Securitas to give a quick presentation.
Hi, this is Sean. Dan sincerely apologizes for not being able to attend this conference. He, as probably most of the people on the call, COVID is changing sometimes by the hour. So he just got a emergency meeting scheduled through his boss and had to pull away. But I can kind of give you a snapshot of what Securitas is doing. So for people who don't know, Securitas, we're a global company, and we are battling this pandemic in every area that across the entire world. One of the challenges, as each one of the people who have presented before, is even though COVID is a virus and it's a pandemic, it is how we react to it is regional, even to almost to the city. And being Kansas City is a border city from Kansas and Missouri, the jurisdictions and the rules kind of change on, Kansas had just recently announced the state shelter in place ordinance. So we had to make sure that our team had the proper documentation for the ones that worked in Kansas. And then Missouri just recently did it there. So we're constantly having to understand the different legislation that's coming through, what we have to do to do that. And a lot of our clients, from a contract security standpoint, are shutting their doors. So they've been able to take their core employees and have them work remotely, including myself. So I'm working from my house right now. So part of that conversation is, well, our actual officers on the ground are going towards the epidemic. They're going towards the virus, in so much as when a building is closed, there is no one there to protect that building anymore from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So we've actually seen some change in our dynamics of what we normally do outside of the COVID to what we're doing today. Hospitals are setting up these care for tents. Well, they also need additional staff out there to help direct traffic and to help the other stuff. So our largest challenge we currently face from an officer standpoint is, how do we keep our officers safe? A lot of that is driven by the CDC and what we can do for proper social distancing, wearing masks, trying to interpret what different governing agencies tell us what we need to do. We also have the travel industry. So moving from area to area has become more and more difficult, along with the TSA and other things that outside of the private security. So when we're going towards the pandemic, we're part of, grocery stores are having limited hours for people who are at high risk. So we're controlling access for some of those, allowing people in and out that maybe don't fit that profile and are just trying to get in early. So we're kind of battling on multiple fronts, trying to figure out what we can do to keep our team safe, but also help keep the order, even so much as, making sure people when they come into the grocery store aren't trying to buy more toilet paper, because there seems to be hoarding on that, along with everything else if you made it into a grocery store. Walmart just recently announced that they are going to limit the number of people allowed in the store per time. So somebody has to control that access. And from a contract security, that is a lot of where we are going headstrong into this thing. So that kind of brief discussion on the contract security side. I'm sure that a lot of the other contract security are running into the same challenges we are. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them the best I can.
Yes, my name is Ken Williams. I've got a question. How are you and how's everybody else preparing for looting and civil unrest? And at this time, how big of a threat do you think these things are projected to be in the Kansas City area in particular?
Very good question. I know that we've been kind of trying to keep our pulse on what that looks like. There has not been a overwhelming threat. Maybe some of the other folks on there could jump in and answer. As conditions become, as resources become more and more challenging, the government has to look into figuring out what makes the right decision at what time. So from a contract security standpoint, we're trying to adjust and help business and industries and local legislation, state legislation to help guide that conversation. As being part of the KC-ASIS community, we also talk about that. What can we do as a group? And I'm sure InfraGard is also having conversations on how can we best serve the local governments, whether it be state, city, or county, in whatever capacity we have. So I open the floor to the rest of the panel to help jump in.
This is Donna. As a government entity, we still maintain our risk assessment for that type of thing to occur. But again, it's the discussions of, we have the essential services, or food, medicine, and those types of things remain open. And just, having those conversations with sheriff and police, see what they find, FBI, any of that kind of intelligence. But again, it's just maintaining that same assessment that we've always done. And we don't have any indicators of that as yet. That would be something mass around here from what's been shared with me.
Great question. Is there any more questions or comments for Sean? All right, our next panel speaker is Philip Lance from Black and Beach. Philip actually contacted me a month ago and asked that ASIS put something together like this webinar. So I appreciate the prodding, and this is what we were able to come up with, Philip. So you could go ahead and take it away.
No, that's great. How you doing, everybody? My name is Phil Lance, and I am a security assurance and intelligence/counterintelligence specialist for Black and Beach, which means it's a long title that basically means I do whatever has to be done. Knowing that I was coming after RJ and that our process would look very much similar, probably about 2 weeks, 2 weeks behind, ahead of theirs, just because we had to be with the early people that we had that were exposed. I kind of took a different route with this, And I'm going to go a little bit over, kind of what happened. But then the next slide, when we get there, is going to be kind of the lessons I learned. And I don't necessarily speak for Black and Beach on this, but these are the kind of things that I saw that maybe I could have done better, or maybe we could have done better as a team in this. So this, we were tracking it just like RJ had said. We were tracking it early. Right around the 27th of January, we had pushed, myself and one of the other regional security professionals had pushed an update to our pandemic plan, which we pulled off the shelf, dusted off and whatnot, from, I believe it was H1N1 back in the bird flu days. So it was a little bit out of date. And we took a look and we thought it was hot to trot, that it was a good thing. Little did we know at the time. Shortly thereafter, we got an email from a professional that said, "Hey, I just got this from someone that reports to be from Gesundheit, Gesundheit something from Germany." And I don't, her indication, the other person that got it, well, we don't think it's real. I happen to have lived in Germany for a good deal of my youth and my adult life when I was still in the military. And so we went, across to vet it. And, I joke you not, it was from Gesundheit.de, which, probably didn't help with us believing, or the professional believing, that it was real. So we got that sent to us about 10 o'clock in the morning. And once I was able to validate it through sources or through assets that I still have in Germany and within the Bundes government, we ended up taking and isolating, or sending those two professionals home to be away, right? So fast forward a little bit, and I think it was probably might have been the day after that occurred. The vice president of environmental safety, health, and security said, "Hey, we need to stand up the incident response team, and this is who, this is what we're doing." So it met, multiple times, and mostly virtually, but it met. And right about 5 March, we decided that it might have been a little bit too big, a little bit too unwieldy, and it was getting bogged down. So we started asking our question, who needs to be there, and who actually just wants to be included and whatnot. And then since we have 80 some offices around the world, we kind of determined, and they had already done it, but we kind of formalized and codified that process of creating sub-IRTs within regions, and then having one or two, generally it would be the safety manager for a region and the regional security manager, as well as maybe a senior business type leader, who would then be members of the larger company IRT. While we're doing this, sometime in mid-February, we decided that we were going to develop a overarching travel plan. We'd already made business critical, travel to a couple locations, like RJ had mentioned that Burns and Mac had done. And we were trying to figure out how we were going to deal with domestic travel, with international travel. How do you deal with places that are geographically disparate, where like the United States, let's say mid-February, you might have a hotspot on the West Coast, 2 hotspots on the West Coast. You have one major hotspot that's kind of, starting to take off on the East Coast, but the rest of the country was pretty much status quo. How do you deal with that? Because you can't just, call a country, give one rating for a country, like that. And there are a couple areas like that. And then about 5 March, we implemented a visitor questionnaire that we send out, can't be created or can't be filled out more than 48 hours before a visit. They can get to it through a QR code, and it basically gives them an automated reply if they are a hard denial, an automated approval to be a visitor at a facility. And once again, this is when, the vast majority of facilities were open, but it's still being used for project sites because a lot of our sites are critical infrastructure, so they're still going on. And then it referred it to the COVID incident response team, the CERT, as you will, for adjudication, if it was one of those middle areas. And I'll get into the CERT in just a minute. If you can move to the next slide. All right, so that's a basic, quick, down and dirty overview of kind of how we did and what we did. So some of the lessons that we learned is right-sizing the IRT. At one point, I think the IRT was 55 or 60 people because one person would forward an invitation to the next and so on and so forth. We had people that wanted to be there. And this is me, speaking probably not politically correctly, but there were a bunch of people that wanted to be there so they could say they were in the know, but had no reason to actually be there and weren't providing any value added. And sometimes they would actually be taking up bandwidth and having decisions or recommendations that would then be pushed up the chain, take longer than they might otherwise have had. So right-sizing the IRT was something that needed to happen. So in order to do that, what we did was we set up the COVID incident response team and just added a C on the front. That ended up being what the model we're using now. So we brought I ended up started to set it up on behalf of the VP for our ESH and S. And we kind of quickly figured out that it was going to be way too much for one person. So we brought in a regional security person that we had that was very experienced in setting up field talks, in the military, because basically this is an incident response team, right? It's basically a command center that is field expedient and then kind of moves as the central control facility for it. And so we brought someone up that had a military background in just doing that, and we were lucky to have them organically already. One of the other lessons learned that we had was confusion in terminology. That email that came in from the Gesundheit Institute in Germany called it the SARS-CoV-2, right? Because that's the virus. COVID-19 is actually the disease or set of symptoms, but the virus itself is the severe acute respiratory syndrome 2, coronavirus. So when it wasn't, when this was still early, when this came in, people didn't understand, the different terminology. And so that led to a decrease in our reaction time that we probably should have had because we had to validate that, what they were talking about. So confusion in terminology across the spectrum and across the business units, getting that, one terminology across the board was very important. Treating it as confirmed until otherwise proven. I think that, one of the things that I probably didn't do right, I recognize it about half an hour in, is we let the person stay in their officicle, if you will, after they had received that letter. At that point, in retrospect, should have sent them immediately home and had them quarantined. Because this was new and we were still reacting as opposed to being proactive and predictive, we didn't treat it as confirmed until we heard otherwise. We mitigated that fairly well, and we were able to bounce back from that. But if that person had come down with symptoms and or had been contagious at that point, it would allow that contagion to spread a little bit more, and the ramifications would have been a little bit more serious. Internal equals external comms. So one of the things we learned is that it doesn't matter if it's an internal only comms, it's going to be an external comms. So we have to write it that way. Case in point with those two people that were first in the area for exposure that we knew about, it hit the news, and we had a call from the news within 10 minutes of the internal communication about this going out. And I'm sure it's a professional who has a friend or a family member that works for a news organization, and they're trying to do the right thing. But whatever you write internally is going to be external, and so you have to think of it that way. The the one thing that we did do really well is before we released the internal communications, the external communications were written as well. And then we wrote the whole gamut of different communications we might need going forward down the pipe early. Internal social media, I don't know what other organizations have, but we have Yammer and whatnot with internal social media. One of the things that I saw was that during the periods between communications that were official, whether they be from the CEO, from the business unit presidents, from the head of the CERT, the COVID incident response team, any of those, when there was a gap in communication where someone felt like there should be more information out there, they generally went upon themselves to provide information. And that information on as a whole was not good information. It was I'm sure everybody saw, well, the National Guard's about to declare martial law. It's those kind of things, the alarmist things that you want to try to minimize. And then in the absence of affirmative guidance, people will make it up. So we were really quick about providing certain amounts of guidance on, types of travel you could do to certain locations. For a big cog, it turned relatively quickly. But when you look at it in a vacuum, it might not have been as quickly as some other people wanted. So we had people in departments and departments heads taking it upon themselves to say, hey, nobody from my department is going to travel. And once you have that, then you have that cascade effect. Well, Johnny says that Ben's department is not letting anybody travel. Why aren't they? What do they know that we don't? And you start getting those rumors, and then when people make it up, it causes fear and it causes those differing standards. So doing that standards control and whatnot, and then defining things like business critical. Excuse me. We didn't have a definition, and when I went out and I contacted a bunch of other companies that I knew people at from my former life as a counterintelligence agent, a lot of people didn't have a good definition what business critical looked like, or what business essential looked like, or what routine travel might be. And so being able to design those was an important thing that maybe ahead of time, we'll be prepared for the next time this happens, because I'm sure it will happen again sometime. We have kind of those things and taking those lessons learned. The other point that I think we did really well that I didn't put on here was when we stood up the CERT, within 24 hours, we got lucky because the guy that we brought in was Australian military, and he happened to be in the United States at the time. And we were able to pull him in to help set up the CERT. And within 24 hours, we had an email address. I'd already created an intranet page on my own, which is no longer my own. Now it belongs to internal communications for COVID type information. But we had an email. We had a watchkeeper that was answering or monitoring that email account, almost 24 hours a day, about 20 hours a day. We were getting back to people in an hour. And so even if that response was, hey, we don't have a great answer for you right now, but we know it's an issue and we'll get back, just letting them know that they've been heard was really good. And the last thing I didn't put on there, but I think that we did well, is we became reactive. And so we were trying to provide, with our intelligence shop, very much like RJ had talked about, information that allowed the decision makers to be as predictive as possible and make the right choices being predictive. This is the way we think it's going to go here. This is how long we think this is going to last. These are the things you're going to see in the coming days. So let's address it in the communication, 4 days before we think it's going to happen. And I think that we did that really, really well. Once we got, kind of some steam into the picture. Hopefully this helped. It's a little bit different than maybe the intent, but I knew RJ was going to steal that thunder. and he probably was much more eloquent than I would have been, and I appreciate him doing that. So, barring any questions, this is what I have, and I'm here to help. If anybody has any questions or comments or any resources that they might need, just reach out to me, and I'm more than willing to provide those. As my boss says, there's no competition among security professionals. We might have businesses that compete sometimes, but not right now.
I feel this is Rick Dunn. I have a couple questions. So when you set up the search, you're mentioning that you man it like for 20 hours out of a day, 24 hours. And with that, so I'm assuming that most of the folks you're bringing in, have like a day job too. I mean, how are you able to man the cert, but also still continue doing daily operations?
So a lot of the people that especially at first, we did have other types of things we were doing. I was pretty much splitting my time. I think it was supposed to be 50-50. I think it ended up being about 90-10. COVID response. Up front, setting this stuff up, developing processes and whatnot. So some of it was the other guy that we brought in to help spearhead it, who ended up becoming essentially the chief of staff, because this is his full-time job right now. Is the COVID incident response team. He was already a little bit on different hours than I was, just because he's based out of Singapore, or was based out of Singapore, before we brought him here to the greater Kansas City area. And we would just routinely check it, so the two of us would tag team it. We figured that wasn't sustainable, so we went out and we found, I'm trying to remember the program, I think it's the Aspire program or something like that, but it's early career people that are trying to get into the safety, into security, into management, PMP type stuff. And we brought one in, and we made a dedicated watchkeeper, and he keeps statistics on how many emails that did we get in, what were the email questions, so that if we saw it more than 4 or 5 times, we added it to the FAQ. What are the concerns? What are the touch points that the emails are a little bit more emotional, so that we can put a personal touch on some of those if we need to, with a call or whatnot. And that allowed me to kind of step back from that manning of that email and concentrate on other things like, how are we tracking people that are suspected or have been in proximity with someone with COVID, or when was the last time, once we got a test confirmed case or a presumptive case, when was the last time someone called out to just gauge and say, hey, how are you doing? Like RJ had said, your major outside contact was this business, was your work, and your friends are at work, and you're separated from them. Hey, do you just need to talk for 4 or 5 minutes? And so tracking that and then pushing those down eventually to the business unit security managers to do became, kind of my job, as you will. Had a question. Digital security, web security, leadership, business. That's a good question, man. That's a question that's going to be debated for years.
Yeah, Phil, is it for the folks that are on strictly on phone? So we got a question in the chat. Says we have digital security, physical security, web security, and etc. Will or should business corporations have biosecurity, i.e. Chief Medical Biology Officer? And I think we open it up to the whole panel.
Honestly, I think we've seen movement that way with some places. ISOS, and their competitors, they do have, plans or programs where you get a CMO on call, basically, kind of a thing. And I think that you're going to see a lot more companies doing that as they surge to fill this capability. I mean, we might move out of the social distancing like we're doing, but it's not going to be an on-off switch. It's going to be a dimmer type switch as opposed to a binary switch. And I think you're going to see a lot of businesses start to do that that's just my 2 cents.
Well, from the government side, I'm looking at it. We have our public health departments, and then you also have the state health departments. And being that we're supposed to be a collaborative community as far as information sharing, that's definitely one of those segues that I think that should be promoted, and to use that ability to invite them to the table to have the discussion from that angle. Would someone have them on board? I could see that possibility at some point, but I think there's a lot to be learned that, we're not sharing our information as best as possible with current resources now. And I think there's some lessons to be learned from that is, engage with those public health officials to get that information, and then run your own company's risk assessment and apply as necessary.
This is RJ, and I'll say from my opinion, and I'll kind of take a picture from my old role as a security consultant. Everyone on this call knows the 2 largest things that generate security spending is an event or a regulation, right? This, I think, will drive increased interest in a biohazard type security but it'll be, the longevity will be short, right? Because the pandemics to this size and scale are not common. They're there, they're not common. And what you'll see, in my opinion, is, and this is certainly out of Burns and Mac, that person doing it as a sole job will be a pretty prominent figure for the next number of years, but then it will start trailing off to where you'll see someone will then have that skill and normal occupational health and safety type skill set. And then barring something, business line leaders saying travel a lot, some other business owner still be able to travel, for argument's sake. What we did is we created that web address, that email that anyone could send a question to. It came back to our core response team, which was 6 people, to formulate a response. And then it went into an FAQ with the main desire of, hey, we could direct as much to the FAQs as possible, so that and what we found is the number of questions have gotten less and less and less as the FAQs got filled in more and more beneficial. So anyway, I wanted to add to that other piece as well. So that's all I got.
This is Trina, and I'll weigh in on the question about biohazard security. I think one of the things that we're going to see from an employment standpoint is we saw really rapidly changing laws about medical testing. As I think we all know on this call, there's a lot of privacy with respect to an individual's medical information. Even if you're not a HIPAA provider, the ADA and other laws require that certain medical information be kept private. So, but we saw from the EEOC issuing guidance and DOL issuing guidance, the shift from, no, you can't do a temperature scan. A temperature scan is a medical test, and employers can't require their employees to do medical tests. And there's exceptions to that for different things. But we saw that change very quickly into different recommendations with respect to temperature scans. So I think from a biohazard standpoint, we'll probably see some laws that change as the pandemic progresses and hopefully wanes. But I think that we'll see a lot of different things that may get loosened if it's for the, so there might be we might see fewer individual rights in favor of the larger community rights, which is what we have seen from an employment standpoint. So I just wanted to add that as well.
This is Ken Williams. I think a lot of corporations, especially Fortune 1000, will probably continue to rely on their existing employee health care and health insurance programs, and work with human resources departments to work with the experts with their healthcare providers to address issues like this. I really don't see us, hiring a CBO or CMO or something to deal with the medical or bio aspects of this. As somebody else has intimated, this is something that's not going to be permanent and will hopefully go away in 12 to 24 months.
So one of the questions that came up in the chat room, it says, what are the laws around doing temperature scans of your employees?
I'm assuming that's directed at the lawyer on the call. They vary a lot based on different guidance. Generally, if you're in a healthcare setting, it's different. So you'll need to be cognizant of what your healthcare setting is. The critical part is, and we have a lot of that information on our website for you to look at. It is happening. The critical part is that it's being done consistently. One of the biggest issues that the CDC flagged and other healthcare professionals flagged at the very beginning of this pandemic is that, hey, just because we know that people can be carriers, right? And I'm not a healthcare professional. But we know that my understanding and my firm and other legal professionals' understanding is that people can be non-symptomatic carriers of coronavirus. So you have to really think about whether those temperature scans are doing what need to be done and are helpful and appropriate. And you really have to use the proper folks to do those. Typically, those are nurses or other professionals that are trained. They have to be provided or should be provided the appropriate PPE because they're going to be standing within 6 feet of someone. And we have to be properly disposing of those, any things that's being utilized for that type of medical condition that medical test. So we have to be very careful with it, but I encourage everyone to ask whether we think it's worth it or not. I know that in many hospital settings, it's definitely being required, and sometimes twice a day. And others can probably weigh in if you're in a healthcare setting. It's also being required not only for employees, but also for visitors. And frankly, in a time like this, I really think that employees are really, for the most part, cooperating. From an HR perspective and a legal perspective, we always try to not make policy to the minority, right? So the majority of the employees and majority of visitors are cooperating with these types of things that are going in place. But I think it's way more complex than yes or no. It's thinking about the procedure of how we're doing it. Is it really allowed or required under the law? And the answer is very generally yes, but you have to be careful about how you're administering it and if it really makes sense in your industry. Don't you love lawyer answers? They're always like maybe and wavering and fact dependent. But I think we need to be really cautious with those types of things because they may not be helping us.
So Trina, this is RJ Hope with Burns. I'll add, while we are doing that on our construction sites, we're also aware that given COVID-19's nature now, that's a lagging indicator. So the problem is once you're feverish and symptomatic, you've already been contagious for a number of days. So Trina's 100% correct. It's not necessarily the best indicator, but it's something in the hopes of, all of us on this call have gone to work when we didn't feel well, right? And we probably shouldn't have gone, but we worked our way through it under the normal cold and flu season. What we're hoping to do is to catch that person that is just trying to get through it, right? Early than when it gets bad. But she's exactly right, especially with COVID. That's certainly a lagging indicator.
We have another question from the group chat is, what are the issues relating to work comp claims as people are working from home and issues with the virus?
And this is Trina again, and I am not a workers' comp lawyer, but generally it's governed by what your policy will say with respect to, whether they, and I'm looking at my floor right now, and I have like an iPad cord, and I have my laptop cord, and I have a phone cord, and whether I trip over those and fall. So it generally depends on what your carrier, your policy will say. I think maybe hopefully that answers the question. I think that there definitely can be coverage though.
Well, if there's no more questions, Donna, do you want to say anything to your chapter members?
I did just want to add anything. So anyone who's a Johnson County, Kansas resident, you were just talking about the, doing the scans to see if anyone has a temperature. We're talking about symptomatic versus asymptomatic persons with the virus. So as a method to try and kind of learn a little bit more and gather data across the county, the Department of Health and Environment has actually released a survey. I shared it on my LinkedIn page. I'm also going to include it here in the group chat. And then you can also go to the county's website and Facebook page. I don't know if they've got it on Twitter yet, but I know it's going to be communicated out. And it's a quick survey. They ask that you complete it for each person in your household. And it's just to gather data as far as have you had any symptoms and all of that. It's very short and sweet, but it's just to try and kind of look at things from flattening the curve and seeing where we're at as far as, and also learning between, there's people that have tested positive yet have no symptoms. And, fever being one of them, never being a symptom that they had, but they tested positive. So just trying to gather more information to assist. And if you want to take that survey, go ahead and do that. And like I said, I'll include it in the chat. It's on my LinkedIn page, and then have it on the county pages as well.
Great. I'd like to thank the panel members for sharing their expertise during this time period. I also like to thank InfraGard as joining and working together to present this information. And lastly, to the ASIS group, I appreciate you for coming up the call. Also, if you're ASIS, please contact Mike Benton to receive TPE credit. All right, everyone, take care and stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Kim Williams. I have a quick question for everybody. Are any of you scrambling or struggling to enhance and fortify your online presence because of the pandemic? And for those of you with a substantial brick and mortar business in particular, how are you dealing with being forced to quickly transition to it or more heavily rely on